You're listening to Three Things to Know with Stephanie Haney, with experts and insiders on what you need to know in Northeast Ohio.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back to the Three Things to Know podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Haney, and as always, I am thrilled to have you here joining me for the podcast. Today, we're talking about something that a lot of people, I think, are maybe hesitant to bring up. It's the concept of imposter syndrome. And if you don't know what it is, maybe it's something that you felt, or if you haven't felt it, congratulations, because it's not a great feeling. I'll tell you the first time I kind of maybe addressed these feelings or had sort of a recognition or a realization that something like imposter syndrome kind of existed. I was in journalism school at the University of Southern California out in Los Angeles, and I was at a forum. They had such great speaker series all the time, great program there. So I was at a forum, and there was a woman speaking, and she was talking about excelling and moving beyond expectations. And there was a question and answer session, and I raised my hand and I said, how do you get over the fear of failing? Because at that point, I had felt very overwhelmed. It was a very intense program. It was a year long, but it was a lot. And I really, honestly, genuinely felt at that time that I could very easily fail every single day. And I asked that. I said, how do I move past this fear that I am going to fail every day? And I felt like my question got a little bit brushed off. But after that, other people came up to me and they said they felt the same thing. They felt the same way. They had this sort of just looming thought that eventually they were going to be found out for not necessarily being as great as they were expected to be or as competent as they were expected to be as other people thought they might be. And that, in a nutshell, from my experience, is the concept of imposter syndrome. This idea that if we go along the trajectory that we're on, eventually people are going to find out that we're really not so great. We're not so smart. We're not so accomplished. We're not so competent. And it's something that seems to impact a lot of people. That concept that failure is inevitable and it's only a matter of time. So to hopefully get us out of our heads on this topic a little bit, get us in the know about it, we've got a guest coming back who's been with us before. His name is Dr. Adam Borland. He's a psychologist with the Cleveland Clinic. When he was with us before, he talked about dealing with loneliness in the pandemic, but he's here today to sort of help our minds wrap around the concept of imposter syndrome. So let's bring him in right now. Dr. Borland, thank you so much for joining us again on the Three Things to Know podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
It is great to have you back here to talk about this topic that I think is it's a tough thing for people to talk about, this concept of imposter syndrome. Now, how would you describe imposter syndrome from a professional perspective?
Yeah, it's a difficulty internalizing a feeling of success. It's this feeling of inadequacy, feeling like a fraud, frankly. We question our competence. We negatively compare ourselves to others. And this is a prevalent dynamic that I see in my practice.
It's something that I hear about, my friends talk about. It's something that I hear peers and colleagues talk about a little bit, but I do think there is sort of a hesitancy to really kind of express it because of that feeling of feeling like a fraud. You think, well, if I express this, then people are going to know I'm going to be found out to be this fraud that you're not. So where do these feelings come from? What is triggering this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from this perceived sense of perfectionism that we hold on to, that somehow we have to be superhuman, that mistakes are not okay. We hold ourselves to such high standards that, frankly, we wouldn't hold others to. So I think if we can accept the fact that, hey, I'm not perfect with everything, there's going to be stumbling blocks, and that's okay. And there are things that I am successful at, and I'm going to celebrate those successes.
Absolutely. Where do you think that desire or that yearning or that feeling that we have to be so perfect comes from? What's the root of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, we're not entirely sure. I suppose we could probably look at family of origin. If someone grew up in a very competitive family, or a family where expectations were extremely high to achieve academically or athletically, that puts a lot of pressure on someone at a young age. I also think just the society we live in a competitive society. And a lot of times it can be very kind of black and white. You've either succeeded or you haven't succeeded. And that gray area, frankly, is where life is lived. That's what I see a lot in my practice.
I kind of like that word succeeded, because that's like a combination of succeeded and failed. And I think you need a healthy dose of both to really get anywhere in life.
Yeah, I'm going to trademark that.
You should. You absolutely should. Okay, so we're talking about how imposter syndrome makes you feel. This is the thing that's going on inside of our brains. It's a very internal thing. But if someone's coming to you and you're treating them as a psychologist and you're taking a look at maybe some observable things that they're doing, how does imposter syndrome manifest itself? What can we see? What kind of actions can we look out for?
Well, a lot of times it manifests itself as anxiety, right? It's rare to find someone who is dealing with this imposter syndrome who doesn't also experience high anxiety, self-doubt. Some telltale signs in my practice are when someone has difficulty recognizing their success, viewing their success as kind of just dumb luck, or the fact that that somehow the sun was shining on them that day, but it's an exception to the rule. They have difficulty accepting compliments from others. So you really begin to see these characteristics pretty early on.
So many light bulbs are going off in my brain right now as you're mentioning these things. I'm like, where have I seen that? Where am I maybe guilty of these things? So lots of things that you can look out for, of course. Is there a particular demographic or group of people who seem to be more impacted by imposter syndrome?
That's the interesting thing, is that there really doesn't seem to be. It's kind of across the board. I have dealt with people from all different backgrounds, age ranges, life circumstances who deal with this. And it's pretty remarkable.
Okay, so this is something, no matter what your station or situation in life, it might be impacting you. What about a level of success? Do you see any higher or lesser instances of imposter syndrome depending on how someone is successful in their life? And success is obviously such a subjective measure, but
right. Yeah. Well, like I said, it's, I do see it across all different planes of life, but with those individuals who are highly successful, with success comes a lot of pressure. You've succeeded, and now the expectation is that you're going to continue to succeed. People who have achieved high levels of success often question, how did I get here? And there's tremendous amount of literature out there regarding very notable, CEOs and celebrities and people that we view as being extremely successful, who on a daily basis question, how did I get here? I'm going to be figured out at some point that I don't know what I'm doing.
And something that goes along with that too is, there's kind of this adage of ask not or don't rest on what you did yesterday, but what will you do tomorrow? And that pressure to continue to do and be more.
Yeah, it's that old adage of we're not human beings, we're human doings, that we're just constantly going. And we very rarely allow ourselves to just be in the moment and frankly enjoy and celebrate those successes that we've had.
Mm-hmm. And, as we're talking about this, I'm sure there might be some people listening who are thinking, so what? You're successful and you're stressed about it. Big deal. And, of course, on one level, it's like an interesting problem to have if you're succeeding and you're thinking, I've got the success. I'm not sure if I really deserve it. But what are the dangers if imposter syndrome runs unchecked?
Yeah, well, I think if we look at people who perhaps aren't at the level of success that they want to be.
Right, we're not all Jeff Bezos, right?
Exactly. So is it somehow holding them down from achieving further goals in their lives? I think we can also look at just if it's unchecked, how is it affecting anxiety? How is it affecting self-esteem, family dynamics? Um, there's a whole lot of branches from this tree if we really concentrate on feeling like a fraud.
Sure, I can imagine on some level it could turn into really a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're feeling that way and that's kind of preventing you from doing things, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I see in my practice a lot. And that's where I try and help my patients reframe that type of thinking.
It just makes me think about the dangers of negative self-talk in general. And if you hear something, even if it's from someone else or if you're telling yourself something over and over again, the more and more you hear that thing, the more true, at least in my experience, it starts to become and feel for you.
Sure, we adopt it. We're kind of that emotional sponge. We absorb all of it. And it's often easier to absorb that than to focus on the success and our strengths. We tend to overlook those. So that's really in therapy what we work on a lot of is adopting and embracing that success, those achievements. Because guess what? They're all there. There's data, there's facts right there that can be looked at and said, oh, right there, I succeeded on that. Why am I overlooking that?
Yes, we got to celebrate. We have to celebrate those things. So, with that, I guess that would sort of fall in line with what other tips you might have for people overcoming that imposter syndrome. What can we do to kind of get past this?
Yeah, I think it really helps to be able to talk about these feelings, whether you're talking about it with a friend, a family member, maybe you have a mentor or a coworker that you feel like you can talk to. I'm always a big proponent of that. If you need to talk to a professional, it brings a lot of people to my office, these feelings of imposter syndrome. Again, just trying to reframe, right? This is how I'm feeling, right? But that doesn't mean that it's accurate. Let me look for facts to back up. Look at all the success that I've had, right? So this feeling of fraud, of being a fraud, isn't actually accurate. There are some words that I listen to in my practice, and one of them is should. We use the word, as humans, we use the word should a lot, right? And what should does is it sets these unrealistic expectations, right? I should be running a 10-minute mile. And unfortunately, I'm only running a 15-minute mile. Why aren't I? Those expectations may be unrealistic, but we hold ourselves to them. And when we do so, we often feel as though we're failing. So monitor those shoulds.
I love that. The should should be a 4-letter word, I think.
Yes. Absolutely.
Shrink that down. We're going to spell it differently. I don't know how we'll do it. We'll take out the vowels. SHLD.
There you go. I like that.
Okay, we've been talking about this just sort of in terms of success because kind of that's the world that it pops up in, imposter syndrome, right? This is not really something, I don't know, is this something that transcends into other areas of this life, or is this kind of just like a professional sort of thing? Is it contained in the professional space?
Oh, no, I think this occurs in personal lives as well. Especially during the pandemic, we heard quite a lot about, parents putting this tremendous amount of pressure on themselves to balance raising children, working and maintaining a household, and this idea that I'm failing at this, right? That I'm not doing it well enough, and I'm negatively comparing myself to what I see on social media or from friends or family. And the reality is, we have to focus on, hey, I'm doing a good job here. I'm going to focus on the success.
That's a great takeaway because I have sort of always just kind of conceptualized this in the professional space, but that's a great point. There are a lot of pressures to succeed in all parts of our lives, and we might feel like we're not living up to those expectations. So my parting question for you then, before I let you go here, is obviously from what we talked about, it sounds like this is sort of an inside job, sort of dealing with the imposter syndrome, but how can we help others? How can we be more supportive? How can we do things to kind of create a culture that isn't so welcoming to this imposter syndrome popping up into our lives?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to communication. I think the more that we communicate with one another and perhaps realize, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that's feeling this way, right? And that helps. That's validating. So I think the more that we can communicate with one another, I think that's really going to help. And obviously, seeking out professional services if you feel like it's gotten to a point where it's really affecting areas of your life. Thankfully, mental health and mental health treatment are being destigmatized finally. So knowing that those services are always available.
That is the perfect point to end on here, as we're trying to bring awareness to the fact that this exists. If you're feeling this way, you're definitely not alone. And to that point, of course, as always, Dr. Borland will link a link to your profile at the Cleveland Clinic in the show notes if people want to connect with Dr. Borland that way. And thank you for joining us back here again on the 3 Things to Know podcast. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Right there at the end there, that is a great reminder from Dr. Borland that this isn't just in a professional setting. This isn't just in an academic setting, that this idea of imposter syndrome, these feelings of being a fraud and this fear of failure will creep into our lives. There are lots of pressures out there to perform in other areas, lots of pressure to be a perfect friend and never let anyone down, lots of pressure to have the most engaging content online, to be a sort of social media star, and all the pressure that comes along with that, and the validation of likes and comments, and that's just a whole nother system. And the pressure to be a perfect parent or to become a parent at all, that's a societal pressure that we feel. And some people might feel like they're failing at getting to that point or doing the job that they're doing, and just kind of comes down to this thought of we're all doing the best that we can, right? And to be a little bit easier on ourselves, and to acknowledge the good things that we've done, and keep in mind the possibility. And that brings me to what you need to know in NEO this week. Northeast Ohio has beautiful street art, beautiful murals, a ton of them in all different parts of the greater Cleveland area, all different parts of Northeast Ohio. There's one in particular I want to let you know about. It's this beautiful mural. It is on Detroit Avenue, and it says Dream Big, and it's this beautiful black backdrop with these bold colors, all of these swirls, and the words Dream Big just plastered on the side of this building on Detroit Avenue. The address is 6805 Detroit Avenue, and it's on the building where the Love Threading Bar is, which happens to be right next door to the LGBT Community Center of Greater Cleveland. It's beautiful. So if you want to go, check that out. Take a photo of it, or just sit and enjoy it. That is a beautiful piece of street art here in the Northeast Ohio area. That's just kind of a reminder to keep the possibility in mind, and remember that you are capable, you are competent, you are all of those things. This particular piece of art is by Lisa Quine, and you can check out more of her work at lisaquine.com. And now we'll switch gears and we will talk about a good follow, because when you're talking about trying to get yourself out of that negative self-talk space, that can be difficult, but this account is very helpful in that regard. I've been following it for a long time. I share their posts all the time, so if you follow me on Instagram, you may already be aware of it, but this account is Thrive, Thrive, and it's for the company Thrive Global, which was founded by Arianna Huffington. It was launched 4.5 years ago. And their whole concept, bringing it back kind of to the workplace conversation, is about fostering employee well-being, mental health, and resilience, which will directly combat imposter syndrome if you're taking care of your mental well-being, if you're focusing on resilience and your mental health. Great stuff on this account. There was one particular IGTV video that they posted that was about negative self-talk that I really enjoyed, and the concept there was reframing the way you talk to yourself, and if something happens, if you have a setback, to try and approach your inner conversation with yourself like you would with a friend. How would you talk to a friend? You wouldn't be so down on a friend. You wouldn't say, geez, that was stupid, Stephanie. You might say, well, it's okay, you make mistakes, you'll do better next time, what did you learn from it, things like that. And I really enjoyed that. So that's something that really drew me to that account early on. Again, the account is Thrive on Instagram. There's actually a book coming out soon. And the website, if you want to check out more about Thrive, is thriveglobal.com. They also have articles there that are helpful in terms of combating that negative self-talk and sort of just getting out of your own head when it comes to those feelings of impending failure and that kind of stuff. And I will leave you with this parting message. You have a 100% success rate no matter what happens so far up to this point in your life of waking up in the morning and doing whatever it is you're going to do no matter what happened the day before. So keep that in mind. It's something that I tell myself when I'm getting, to be a bit hard on myself about something that may have not gone perfectly, which I can do. I can definitely be guilty of that. As long as nobody died at my hand that day, everything will be fine. Everything's fine. Nobody died, and we'll all do better next time, right? All right, thanks for being here for this week's 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney podcast. If you're enjoying the show, I would love it if you would leave me a rating and a review and send me a DM. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you want to hear about as we continue to explore the things to know here about general topics and what you need to know in NEO and who's a good follow and all of those things. And while you're at it, share the podcast with a friend because sharing is caring. I'll see you back here next week for more 3 Things to Know.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now to stay in the know.